I thought it was just an ordinary journal, blank pages waiting for my thoughts. But then, the words appeared writing on their own, describing my every move. The final entries were the most chilling vivid details of my death I hadn't yet lived. Now, every day feels like a countdown, and the journal's predictions are never wrong. It began on a gray, unassuming afternoon when I wandered into an antique shop tucked away in a forgotten corner of town. The air inside was thick with the scent of aged wood and time-worn leather. Shelves were crammed with curiosities, tarnished silverware, chipped porcelain, figurines, and stacks of brittle, yellowed books. My gaze fell on a journal sitting atop a pile of mismatched knickknacks. Its cracked leather cover, etched with faded gold filigree, seemed to hum with a strange allure. Curiosity pulled me closer. The pages were blank, the kind of blank that beckons creativity or confessions. Something about it felt personal, as though it had been waiting for me. I bought it, on a whim, thinking it might make a great journal or a quirky decoration. The shopkeeper didn't say much, just a faint smirk as he handed me my change. That evening, I opened the journal on my desk, running my fingers over its smooth, cream-colored pages. I picked up a pen, jotted down my name on the inside cover, and left it there. When I returned hours later, something stopped me cold. Beneath my name, in a handwriting that wasn't mine, was the sentence, "You will oversleep tomorrow and miss your morning meeting." I laughed nervously. Surely I must have written it absent-mindedly. But when I overslept the next morning, my alarm mysteriously silenced and missed my meeting. Unease crept in. It wasn't just a coincidence. Full. At first, I dismissed it as an elaborate prank. Maybe someone had snuck into my room while I slept and written in the journal. It was easier to believe that than to accept something unexplainable was happening. I tested it again, writing a question on one of the blank pages. "What will happen to me today?" Hours later, the journal answered in its peculiar script, "You will spill coffee on your favorite shirt." Sure enough, by lunchtime, a full cup of steaming coffee cascaded down my front, ruining my favorite shirt. My rational mind strained for explanations. Maybe I was subconsciously fulfilling its predictions. Perhaps it was just my imagination. Determined to prove the journal's power or lack thereof, I decided to destroy it. I tore out its pages, watching them flutter like wounded birds to the floor. I tossed the leather cover into the fireplace and watched the flames devour it. Satisfied, I went to bed feeling victorious. The next morning, the journal was back on my desk, pristine and intact. I told my friends about it, hoping they'd reassure me that I wasn't losing my mind. Instead, they laughed, teasing me for letting an old notebook get under my skin. That's when the isolation began. I couldn't convince anyone of what I was experiencing. As days turned into weeks, the journal grew bolder. Its predictions were no longer trivial or harmless. It described events in unnerving detail, often down to the minute they occurred. At 3:14 p.m., "You will trip on the sidewalk and sprain your ankle. I spent the day avoiding sidewalks." Altogether, convinced I could outwit it. But at precisely 3:14 p.m., I stumbled over the threshold of my own front door and twisted my ankle. Panic set in as the journal started documenting events involving other people. One entry read, "Your best friend will call you tomorrow with devastating news." The next day, my phone rang. My best friend, voice shaking, told me her father had passed away. But the worst was yet to come. One night, flipping through its pages, I found an entry describing a near-death experience. It claimed that during my evening commute, a car would nearly collide with mine. Sure enough, on my way home, a speeding SUV ran a red light, missing my car by inches. The journal's predictions began leaping ahead, describing events weeks or even months into the future. One entry read, "In 3 weeks, you will lose something precious to you." I spent the following days in paranoia, clutching onto my belongings and avoiding unnecessary risks. 3 weeks later, my grandmother passed away unexpectedly. The entries grew darker with time, their tone almost mocking. They hinted at betrayals, accidents, and heartbreaks that I hadn't yet experienced. I felt like a puppet on strings, my life, orchestrated by an unseen hand. Then I found that entry, the one that made my blood run cold. It described, in vivid detail, the moment of my death. It was precise, down to the location, time, and even the clothes I'd be wearing. My breath hitched as I read the final line, and you will have no way to stop it. The journal was no longer just a curiosity. It was a harbinger of doom, a mirror reflecting a future. I couldn't escape. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that my life was no longer my own. The journal's control over my life became unbearable, and I resolved to outsmart it. If it could predict the future, I believed I could change it. It felt like a game of chess, me versus this cursed artifact. The next prediction was simple: at noon tomorrow, you will break a mirror I made a point to stay far from anything remotely reflective. My resolve hardened as the clock approached noon. But as the final seconds ticked away, the mirror in my bedroom inexplicably toppled from its mount, shattering into countless shards. I stood there, paralyzed, realizing that fate wasn't so easily cheated. The journal's power seemed absolute, yet I refused to surrender. I thought, maybe I need to be smarter. For the next prediction, you will drop your phone in water, I avoided my phone altogether, keeping it locked in a drawer. Yet somehow, during a brief moment of distraction, I found my phone submerged in the sink. Fate always realigned, no matter how carefully I planned. Then came the prediction I feared most in 2 days. You will be in a car accident, I called in, sick to work, and stayed home, avoiding all vehicles. That morning, as I sat reading in my living room, a car swerved off the road and crashed into my front porch. I narrowly avoided being crushed. Shaken and desperate, I began to question whether I could escape the journal at all, or if my defiance only made things worse. Desperation led me to dig into the journal's past. Who had owned it before me? How had it come to exist? I scoured libraries and the internet, searching for stories of cursed objects or journals with mysterious powers. Slowly, a pattern emerged: accounts of similar journals, each tied to tragic endings. One name appeared repeatedly: a man named Victor Callahan, rumored to have owned a self-writing journal decades ago. Intrigued, I followed the trail to an old newspaper article. Victor had died under mysterious circumstances, his journal found next to his body. The final entry eerily read, "Tonight, I will take my last breath." I tracked down Victor's granddaughter, who was hesitant to speak at first. "The journal ruined his life," she whispered. "It knows you better than you know yourself, and it always wins her." Cryptic warning sent chills down my spine. You can't outsmart it, but you might be able to make a deal. The journal began behaving differently, as though it were aware of my defiance. Instead of simple predictions, its entries started to feel like conversations. "You cannot escape, but you can." Influence, the words seemed to taunt me, yet offer a sliver of hope. One day it gave me a choice: save yourself, but sacrifice another. Refuse, and your demise comes sooner than expected. My heart raced as I stared at the page. Was it bluffing, or did it truly have the power to trade one life for another? I was horrified by the moral implications. Could I live with myself if I sacrificed someone else? Yet, the alternative, the inevitability of my own doom, felt equally unthinkable. I hesitated for hours before finally slamming the journal shut. But when I opened it again, it had written, "Your hesitation is an answer. You will face the consequences." The chilling revelation struck me: perhaps the journal's entries weren't just predictions, they were shaped by my decisions. As though my life was a story it was writing in real time. Knowing too much about the future is a curse. I became consumed by paranoia, scrutinizing every person around me. The journal often hinted at betrayal, leading me to suspect friends, colleagues, even family. I stopped trusting anyone. My relationships unraveled as I withdrew into myself, obsessively analyzing each entry and preparing for the worst. One day, the journal wrote, "Your isolation will break your heart." I dismissed it, too caught up in my own survival to care. But the truth hit me like a dagger when I saw the hurt in my mother's eyes, the distance between me and my closest friend. I was pushing everyone away, just as the journal predicted. It wasn't just predicting events, it was orchestrating them. The hardest entry to read came next. You will lose what matters most. I wanted to resist, to hold on to the people and things I loved, but the journal's prophecy hung over me like a shadow. It was as though I had already lost, simply by knowing. The journal began marking the days in bold numbers at the top of each page. It was counting down to something, my demise, I assumed. The urgency of its tone grew sharper with each entry. You have 6 days left. Prepare. One night, it wrote something strange. There is a way to break free, but it will cost you everything. The cryptic message offered no further explanation. What did everything mean? My life? My soul? Someone else's life? As the countdown neared its end, the journal forced me into a moral dilemma. It presented a choice: accept your fate, and another will live. Reject it, and another will pay. I realized with horror that my actions didn't just affect me, they impacted others in ways I couldn't understand. The final entries were unlike anything before, filled with urgency and cryptic warnings. The choice is yours. Time is up. The journal's final page remained blank, waiting for my decision. My life hung in the balance, and I realized that no matter what I chose, there would be no escaping the journal's influence. The day arrived. The journal sat on my desk, its cover gleaming under the dim light, as though mocking me. For weeks it had written obsessively, detailing every step of my path to this moment. But now its pages were silent, blank, save for a single line written at the top of the bar. Last page at midnight, you will meet the end. I stared at the words, trembling. Midnight was minutes away. I had tried everything to stop this, to escape its clutches. But the journal always won. Every prediction, no matter how small or grand, unfolded like clockwork. And now, the inevitability of my death loomed, pressing down like a weight on my chest. I felt it before I saw it: a shift in the air, a coldness that wrapped around my body and seeped into my bones. The lights flickered. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, their edges sharp as blades. My breath came in shallow gasps as the room itself seemed to close in around me. The journal's pages fluttered violently as though caught in a wind only it could feel. Words began to appear, written in frantic, jagged strokes: look behind you. I froze. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Slowly, I turned my head, and there it was, a figure cloaked in darkness, its form indistinct yet terrifyingly solid. It didn't move, but I could feel its presence, its gaze piercing through me. The journal continued to write, its pages filling faster than my eyes could follow. You invited it. You gave it power. You are the story. A realization struck me with icy clarity. The journal wasn't just recording my fate, it was creating it. Every word, every line had been weaving a trap, and I had willingly walked into it. My fear, my desperation, had fed it, and now it was here to claim me. The figure stepped closer, its outline shifting like smoke, yet anchored in a malice so palpable it choked the air. I stumbled back, knocking over the chair, but there was nowhere to go. The journal's final words appeared in bold, dripping ink: this is your end, but not the end. The story continues. The figure reached for me, its hand, or what resembled one, touching my chest. A searing pain shot through me as darkness closed in, swallowing everything. I felt my consciousness slipping, my body dissolving into the void. When I woke, the journal was gone. The room was eerily still, as though nothing had happened. Yet deep inside, I knew the truth. I was no longer the same. My reflection in the mirror was off. My eyes seemed darker, my movements slower, as if someone else were pulling the strings. Weeks passed, and the memories of that night began to blur. But one morning, a package arrived at my doorstep. Inside was the journal, pristine and waiting. Its first page bore a new message: pass it on, or it will return to you. The weight of the choice crushed me. Pass the curse to another, condemning them to the same torment, or keep it, knowing the cycle would begin again. Months later, I overheard someone whispering about a strange journal they'd found, one that seemed to write by itself. My blood ran cold. I never gave it away. Did it leave me? Or had I unknowingly passed it on? I sometimes hear faint scratching at night, like a pen gliding across paper. My desk feels colder than the rest of the room. And sometimes when I glance at the shadows, I swear something is, or watching. If you dare, share this story. But remember, every time it's retold, the journal's power grows stronger. It moves closer to the next reader, the next victim. Are you sure you're alone as you finish this story? Or is something lurking nearby, waiting for its turn to write your fate? It started with a dream, an endless field under a blood-red sky, and a shadowed house that whispered my name. I thought it was just my imagination, until the people I loved began disappearing one by one. Each time the dream returned, clearer, darker, showing their faces behind its windows. Now I'm terrified to sleep, because I know I'm next and the house is waiting for me. It began with a dream. At least that's what I told myself when I first woke up, heart pounding, sweat pooling on my temples. The details clung to me like cobwebs of blood-red sky, its light stretching endlessly over an empty field. In the distance stood a house, its silhouette jagged and unnatural, as though it didn't belong in this world. The house felt alive. Even now, I can recall the way its windows seemed to stare at me, unblinking, like cold, indifferent eyes. I stood frozen in the dream, unable to move closer, unable to turn away. The air hummed with something unspoken, something wrong. I didn't know how. Long I stood there, staring at it, until I woke up gasping for breath. At first I dismissed it as a nightmare. Nightmares happen, they're just the mind playing tricks. Still, the dream left a residue of unease that followed me through the day. It was a typical Monday: work, lunch, more work. But everywhere I went, the image of the house lingered at the edge of my mind, as though it had followed me out of the dream. That night, the dream returned. This time it was clearer, sharper. The field seemed to stretch farther, and the sky pulsed with a strange energy. The house wasn't just watching, it was whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was undeniable, beckoning, drawing me closer. I woke up just as my feet began moving toward the house, my heart pounding. For hours, I stared at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that something was waiting for me. By the third night, the dream had become a ritual. The house now loomed closer each time, its presence growing stronger, heavier, as though it were forcing itself into my reality. I began to notice strange coincidences in my waking life, the shade of red from the dream's sky appearing in the sunset outside my window, or the shape of the house mirrored in the shadow of a tree. Then, something happened that shook me to my core. I had been out for coffee with my best friend, Megan, a person who had been a constant in my life since childhood. She listened patiently as I described the dreams, laughing it off as an overactive imagination. "You've always had a thing for weird stuff," she teased, brushing off my concerns. That night, the dream changed. The house wasn't alone anymore. I saw Megan standing in front of its door, her face pale and expressionless. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the house, as though it were calling her. I screamed at her to stop, to turn around, but no sound came out. She reached for the door handle, and just as her hand touched it, I woke up. The next day, Megan didn't answer her phone. She didn't show up to work. By the evening, her family had filed a missing persons report. She was gone. After Megan disappeared, the dreams became more than just dreams, they became warnings. Each night, I saw another familiar face standing before the house, their bodies stiff and their eyes devoid of life. Each time, they vanished in real life within days. The police didn't have answers. Megan's car was found abandoned on a desolate stretch of road, but there was no sign of foul play. It was as though she had simply stepped out of her life and disappeared into nothingness. I became consumed with fear and guilt. Had I somehow caused this? Was the house punishing me? I tried to ignore the dreams, to convince myself they were just an awful coincidence. But, deep down, I knew the truth: the house was real, and it was taking the people I loved. I began keeping a dream journal, desperately trying to find patterns or clues. Night after night, the house returned, more vivid than before. Sometimes I saw faces pressed against the windows, faces of the people it had taken. Other times I heard voices calling my name, faint and distorted, like echoes from underwater. It wasn't just the dreams anymore. During the day, I began to notice strange things: a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, a whisper just out of earshot, shadows that didn't belong to anything in the room. I avoided mirrors entirely after glimpsing the house in the reflection of my bathroom mirror. One night, I saw my younger brother Luke in the dream. He stood in the field, staring at the house with the same vacant expression Megan had. I screamed his name, begged him to stop, but the house had already claimed him. When I woke up, I called him immediately. "Hey," he said groggily, his voice thick with sleep. "What's up?" "Stay home today," I pleaded. "Don't go anywhere. Promise me." He laughed, confused, but agreed. I clung to the hope that I could save him if I acted fast enough. But by evening, my worst fear came true. Luke was gone. His friends said he'd left his apartment to meet someone, but he never showed up. The house had taken him, just as it had Megan. The house began speaking to me directly after Luke's disappearance. Its whispers were faint at first, threading through my dreams like a ghostly breeze. At first, I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable: mocking, cruel, and somehow deeply familiar. Then, one night, the whispers grew louder, forming words that sent chills through my body. "You brought them to me." I bolted awake, drenched in sweat. The words echoed in my head, filling me with a dread I couldn't shake. What did the house mean? How could I have brought it to them? I started to question everything. Was this my fault? Had I done something to summon this nightmare into my life? The whispers continued each night, growing more persistent and accusatory. "You opened the door. You can't save them. It's your turn." Desperate for answers, I turned to the internet, scouring forums and obscure blogs for any mention of similar dreams. One story caught my attention: a decades-old account of a man who claimed to have seen the same house in his dreams. According to his journal, everyone he loved disappeared, just like in my dreams. The final entry read: "The house has taken everyone. Now, it's coming for me." I couldn't sleep after reading that. The parallels were too close to ignore. The house's influence wasn't confined to my dreams anymore. I began hearing its whispers during the day, soft but insistent, as though it were following me. Sometimes I saw flickers of the red sky reflected in glass surfaces, or glimpsed the shape of the house at the edges of my vision. One day I woke up with a new sense of resolve. If the house wanted to take me, I would confront it first. But as I would soon learn, confronting the house wasn't as simple as walking into a nightmare. It had plans of its own, and I was only beginning to understand the depths of its hunger. After Luke disappeared, my life unraveled. Work emails went unanswered, dishes piled up in the sink, and I avoided calls from concerned friends. They couldn't understand, not fully. I couldn't explain that my dreams were killing people, or that some malevolent force was choosing my loved ones to consume. If I told them the truth, they'd think I'd lost my mind. And maybe I had. The dreams weren't limited to sleep anymore. During the day, I started hearing faint whispers, low, distorted murmurs that came from nowhere. They spoke my name sometimes, their voices curling like smoke around the edges of my mind. Shadows moved in ways they shouldn't have. I'd catch glimpses of the house reflected in shop windows or in the shimmer of rain puddles on the street. I became obsessed with finding an explanation. I needed to understand what was happening to me, to my friends and family. My apartment is filled with books on dream psychology, hauntings, and folklore. I spent countless hours scrolling through obscure forums, desperate for a clue. But nothing could explain this house, this place that consumed the people I loved. In my search, I remembered a story my grandmother once told me when I was young. It was about a house from her childhood that no one would go near. She claimed it was cursed, that anyone who stepped inside disappeared. At the time, I thought it was just an old woman's way of scaring me into behaving. But now I wasn't so sure. I called my mother, asking her to tell me more about Grandma's stories. She hesitated, saying it was just a silly legend, but I pressed her. Eventually, she admitted that my grandmother had been obsessed with the house for years, claiming it had taken her brother. She said it appeared in her dreams before it happened, my mom admitted. The same way. You've been talking about it. The revelation chilled me to my core. This wasn't new. It wasn't random. The house had been hunting my family for generations. That night, the dream returned with a vengeance. I saw the faces of people I hadn't spoken to in years, friends from school, distant cousins, old co-workers. The house was showing me its next targets, daring me to stop it. I couldn't keep living like this. I needed to stop the dreams, stop the house before it took anyone else. My first instinct was to stay awake. If the house came to me in dreams, I reasoned. Then I just had to stop dreaming. Armed with coffee and energy drinks, I forced myself to stay awake for 3 days straight. By the second night, I was hallucinating. The whispers grew louder, circling me like predators. Shadows slithered across the walls, and every reflection in my apartment seemed to hold the faint outline of the house. When I finally succumbed to exhaustion, the dream hit me harder than ever. The field stretched endlessly before me, the red sky pulsing like a heartbeat. The house wasn't just watching this time, it was waiting. I could feel its hunger, its malevolence, as though it were a living thing. Ang. The whispers grew louder, pulling me toward the house. This time I saw a figure standing in the doorway, a shadowy silhouette with eyes like burning coals. I froze, unable to move as it stepped closer. Its presence was suffocating, its form flickering between shapes, as though it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. I woke up screaming, my heart pounding in my chest. The house wasn't just haunting me. It was trying to pull me in. I tried everything after that: sleeping pills, lucid dreaming techniques, even meditation. Nothing worked. Every attempt to control the dreams ended in failure. The house was always one step ahead, its presence growing stronger with each passing day. Friends urged me to seek help, but what could I say? That I was being hunted by a house in my dreams? That people were disappearing because of me? I couldn't risk involving anyone, else it would only make them targets. The house grew more aggressive. It appeared in mirrors, its outline faint but unmistakable. Shadows in my apartment began stretching unnaturally, pooling in corners and creeping across the floor. I started seeing faces in the windows, familiar ones: Megan, Luke, and others the house had taken. I was trapped, alone and desperate. But one thing was clear: the house wouldn't stop until it had me too. The next time the dream came, I made a decision. If the house wanted me, I would face it. I couldn't let it take anyone else. This time, when I stepped into the dream, I didn't hesitate. The field stretched out before me, the house looming larger than ever. Its windows glowed faintly, and the whispers were deafening, a cacophony of voices calling my name. I moved toward the house, my legs heavy as though wading through water. Each step brought a surge of dread, but I forced myself to keep going. As I reached the porch, the door creaked, open on its own, revealing a dark, yawning void inside. The whispers became words: come inside. You brought them here. Finish it. I stepped through the threshold, and the world shifted. The interior of the house was impossibly large, its walls lined with mirrors that reflected distorted versions of myself. In each mirror, I saw different moments of my life, happy memories twisted and broken. I walked through endless hallways, each room showing me visions of the people I'd lost. Megan's face appeared in a cracked mirror, her voice faint and pleading, "Why didn't you save me?" Luke's reflection stared back at me, his expression empty and cold. Then I saw the figure again, the shadowy presence I'd glimpsed in previous dreams. It stood at the end of the hallway, watching me. This time I approached it. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The figure's eyes burned brighter, and it spoke for the first time, "You." The house began to shift around me, its walls closing in. A searing pain shot through my chest, and I looked down to see a mark etched into my skin, a black, twisting symbol that burned like fire. I stumbled back, gasping for air, as the figure dissolved into smoke. When I woke up, the mark was still there. It was real. The house had crossed into my world, and I realized with horror that I couldn't escape it. Now, it wasn't just my dreams at risk, it was my reality. The house was coming for me, and there was nowhere left to hide. After the house took Luke, I vowed to keep my remaining loved ones safe. I cut off contact with everyone close to me, hoping that distance would shield them. I ignored calls, deleted messages, and even moved to a different apartment to avoid anyone who might try to reach me. It was a cruel choice, but I thought it was the only way to protect them. Then it happened again. The house didn't need proximity, it needed my fear, my guilt, my love. One night, after weeks of isolation, the dream returned, but this time it felt different. The field was darker, the red sky muted and heavy, as though it carried the weight of all the lives the house had stolen. In front of the house stood my mother. She was the only person I hadn't completely shut out. Despite my efforts to push her away, she kept sending me messages, checking in, reminding me that I wasn't alone. I hadn't responded, too afraid that even a single text could make her a target. Yet here she was, standing at the door of the house, her expression eerily calm. I screamed her name, but the sound was swallowed by the dream. She reached for the doorknob and I ran toward her, my legs heavy and slow, as though the ground itself were holding me back. Just as her hand touched the door, I woke up, gasping for air. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and called her. The line rang endlessly before going to voicemail. I tried again and again, but there was no answer. I drove to her house, the streets blurring through my tears. When I arrived, her car was in the driveway, the lights in her home still on. But she was gone. Her purse sat on the counter, her phone on the couch, and her coat still hung by the door. It was as though she had stepped out for just a moment and never returned. The police told me there was no sign of foul play, but I knew the truth. The house had taken her, just like it had taken the others. The dreams became unbearable after that. I saw her every night, her face pressed against one of the house's windows, her eyes hollow and pleading. The whispers were relentless, reminding me that I had failed her, that my love had doomed her. I couldn't take it anymore. If the house wanted me, it could have me, but I wouldn't let it take anyone else. The dreams were a trap, but they were also a message, somewhere hidden in the whispers. And the visions was the answer to why this was happening. I became obsessed with piecing it together, poring over every detail of my dreams, looking for clues that could explain the house's power. That's when I remembered the box. It was something I'd inherited from my grandmother after she passed, a small, ornate chest that I had tucked away in a closet and forgotten. My grandmother had always been superstitious, and the box had seemed like just another odd relic of her beliefs. But now, in the context of the dreams and her warnings about the cursed house, it felt significant. When I opened it, the smell of old paper wafted out, and I found a collection of photographs and letters. The photographs were faded, showing my grandmother as a child with her family. One photo caught my attention, a black and white image of a house. It was unmistakably the house. The letters told a fragmented story, written by my great-grandmother. They spoke of strange dreams, a house that appeared at the edge of a field, and a series of tragedies that struck the family: missing siblings, unexplained deaths, and whispers in the dark. One letter ended with a chilling line: "It feeds on us. It always has." I realized then that the house wasn't just a manifestation of my mind, it was tied to my family, haunting us through generations. My grandmother's stories weren't just legends, they were warnings. And now, the house was hunting me, the last in its line of victims. I searched for more answers, tracing my family tree and uncovering other strange disappearances and deaths. Every line of inquiry pointed back to the house, but no one had ever defeated it. The whispers in my dreams became more urgent, more demanding, as though the house knew I was unraveling its secrets. One night, I found myself back in the dream, standing in front of the house with the letters in my hand. The whispers grew louder, and the door creaked open, beckoning me inside. I hesitated. But something deep within me told me that the only way to end this was to step through. I had resisted the house for so long, but I couldn't avoid it any longer. The dreams weren't just warnings, they were an invitation, pulling me closer to the truth. If I didn't confront the house, it would keep taking the people I loved. The next time the dream came, I walked toward the house without hesitation. The field stretched endlessly around me, the crimson sky pulsating like a living thing. The whispers surrounded me, no longer faint and fragmented, but loud and clear. "Come inside." The door opened. The house stood before me, its jagged edges casting unnatural shadows against the pulsating red sky. The door was open now, a dark void spilling whispers that wrapped around me like icy tendrils. I didn't feel my legs move, but suddenly I was at the threshold. The air was heavier, here, suffocating, as though the house itself was breathing me in. Inside, the darkness was alive. The walls seemed to pulse, shifting in rhythm with my pounding heart. Shadows writhed and twisted, taking fleeting shapes that vanished before I could comprehend them. Mirrors lined the narrow hallway, each reflecting a version of me, younger, older, terrified, and most chilling calm, with hollow, lifeless eyes. The whispers grew louder, clearer. They weren't calling my name anymore. Instead, they spoke a single phrase, over and over: "It's your time." I reached the end of the hallway and stepped into a vast, impossibly large room. The walls were covered in photographs of every person the house had taken, their faces twisted and silent screams. In the center of the room stood the shadowy figure, its form shifting and undefined, but its presence undeniable. Its eyes burned with a fiery light, locking onto me as though it had waited centuries for this moment. "You," it hissed, its voice a chorus of 1,000 stolen souls. "You brought them to me. And now, you stay." I tried to move, to run, but my body was frozen. The floor beneath me rippled, and I felt myself sinking into it. Panic surged through me as the shadows reached up, grabbing my arms and legs, pulling me deeper. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the house, absorbed into its endless void. The shadow loomed closer, its form solidifying into something almost human, yet grotesquely wrong. It leaned in, its voice soft but filled with malice. "You are mine now, but don't worry. They'll remember you when it's their turn." My vision blurred as the darkness consumed me. I saw flashes of my loved ones reappearing in the real world, confused but safe. Their memories of me were fading, their grief dissolving as though I had never existed. The house was erasing me, swallowing me whole. As the last shred of light disappeared, I felt my consciousness fragment, scattering like leaves in the wind. I wasn't gone, not entirely. I was part of the house now, woven into its walls, my soul, trapped alongside the others it had claimed. I could feel their anguish, their whispers merging with mine, a symphony of endless torment. And then, the house began to stir. It shifted, groaning like a living thing, as though preparing for something new. A faint light appeared in the distance, a window to the outside world. Through it, I saw someone standing in a field, staring at the house with wide, terrified eyes. The whispers surged again, this time with a new name. The house had found its next victim. If you dare, share this story. But be warned, every retelling feeds the house, giving it the power to find someone new. Could that someone be you? Are you sure you're alone as you finish this story? Or has the house already found a way into your dreams? And